You know how, because of social media, we have these like parasocial relationships with people we really only know online? Thanks to Instagram, I have a lot of these relationships with women I really admire from around the country, around the world. And one of those is Laura Lemon, the woman behind Hippie Homestead. She is a plant-based urban homesteader in Ohio. And years ago, she walked me through some sourdough troublemaking in all her infinite bread wisdom. But ultimately, we ended up connecting over something more serious, which is our shared story of preeclampsia and birth trauma, which we touch on in this episode. So, content warning if that is something that is triggering for you, I advise hang out and wait for our next episode. Laura and I ended up talking about how social media is one of the important ways that women and moms create community with people who really get what you're going through, and how important that is when you don't really have a community like that in real life, when you're going through something that requires a village. Laura and I also both own urban homesteads where we raise animals and grow our own food. For me, to varying degrees of success. But Laura is a phenomenal gardener, and she has so much to teach about how to grow, harvest, preserve food, and has such an accessible way of talking about gardening and food that really makes it feel like anyone can do it. And that is one of her core values, that anyone can start growing their own food, and how empowering that is and how healing it can be. My central question for Laura on this episode is, can homesteading through growing your own food and reconnecting with the land support women's health, healing, mental well-being while challenging gender roles? In this episode of the Modern Hysteria podcast, Laura and I talk about homesteading versus doomsday prepping, what we really need from postpartum support, moms as hobby farmers, the tradwife and influencer approaches to homesteading. I'm Micah Larson, and this is the Modern Hysteria podcast.
Laura, I'm so glad that you could join me. And you were just telling me that you traveled in a blizzard last night with your kids and your dog.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
So, Laura, you're here to talk about homesteading. I really want to know, how did you come into homesteading? Was it something that ran in your family? How did you arrive at this?
Funny enough, it does run in my family. I come from a long line of, farmers, homesteaders. I was never really involved in that. It was always just stories that I heard. So for me, it never felt like part of myself because I never knew a lot of those ancestors. And it was like walks with my grandpa on the train tracks, like foraging blackberries. And he would talk about, growing up on the farm or the homestead. So I didn't really make any of those connections until I started living this lifestyle myself. And I stumbled onto sort of this homesteading sphere. When my husband and I were looking for a house, we were living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment and we had no outdoor space. And so I volunteered at a farm sanctuary. Every Saturday, I would work, 60 hours a week and then wake up, drive an hour Saturday morning and get 30,000 steps in, just cleaning goat, horse, cow, poop, whatever, for 4 hours and just be so exhausted, but just so fulfilled and just feel so good. And I did that during the winter, just terrible weather. And so when we were looking for houses, I was like, I need to have animals, not just a dog or a cat. I knew that I needed something that would get me outside and to care for them. And we looked at a lot of houses and we found this house, which was in our price range. It already had a pasture, a barn set up for animals, but our neighbor had a goat, and it was an elderly goat. He was in a 15 square foot area of dirt, and no one ever interacted with him, and he was by himself, and goats are herd animals. And so we basically adopted him, and we were soul bonded, and sort of the story of the homestead. And then I learned, all about homesteading and that we didn't really quite fit in.
Okay, so why don't you fit into the homesteading sphere?
So traditional homesteading is a very religious community, very conservative typically. They're typically stay-at-home moms or making their income off of their homestead. Both my husband and I work off of our homestead. We're very spiritual people, but we are not religious. And, we plan to send our children to public school. We are raising, we have rescue animals. They are not being raised for meat, milk, eggs, anything like that, which is hard for people to understand.
And you have 2 kids.
Yeah. So my daughter is almost 4 and my son is 1.
You see in the homesteading sphere that I think I've made this like a Venn diagram before of homesteading, hobby farming, and then tradwives. There's a good overlap in the middle. So do you see those spheres connect with homesteading, hobby farming, and tradwiving?
For sure. And it's a fine line. A lot of it is semantics. Honestly, it's well, what words do you feel comfortable with? There's a ton of overlap there. And I think that's part of why it gets so confusing and why people are making assumptions about everybody else, because it's like this with any label that we choose, right? People struggle with vegan and plant-based. For me, they mean the same thing, but they can mean something different to other people too. And it's really similar for homesteading and this tradwife community. And obviously hobby farms are a lot I think pretty interchangeable with homesteading.
I always think of homesteading having a more of the connotation of traditional somehow, which almost seems like we could get into prepper territory of
Yep.
being self-sufficient.
To the Venn
Yes.
diagram. Yeah.
Okay.
Aside about doomsday preppers. If you're not familiar, a doomsday prepper is someone who prepares for a cataclysmic, catastrophic event, like a natural disaster, government fallout, economic collapse. They're also known as survivalists or preppers. They might hoard and stockpile food. They might build bunkers or become totally self-sufficient and live off the grid. And according to a New York Times analysis of FEMA data, up to 7% of households in the US identify as preppers. Okay, back to Laura.
So the whole prepper, don't trust the government thing, again, it's another overlap. I definitely feel more food secure in having a pantry full of tomatoes and know that I don't have to rely on the grocery store for any tomato products for the entire year, but I'm not growing and canning those tomatoes because I'm worried about an apocalyptic event. If that happens, I'm not going to make it very long. Anyways, so just being real. For me, I see homesteading as this spiral, right? I have always gravitated towards food. Since I was 5, I would spend Saturday mornings in my grandma's kitchen making apple pies. It's the first place where I felt I truly belonged somewhere. I'm the youngest child, so I was always I couldn't just tag along. And my grandma would give me something real to do, which is something that I try to do for my daughter. Is yes, if you want to help me in the kitchen, you can actually cut the peppers and we're going to use them in our food. And for me, that went a long way. That's kind of where my homesteading started, is oh, I already cooked from scratch and let's grow the food that I'm cooking with. Then you're growing herbs and you're learning about herbalism and you're preserving that food and you're learning how to water bath can, and then that turns into pressure canning, and then you're getting a dehydrator, and all of these things sort of spiral. It becomes a routine. Sourdough, throw that in. You add something else as you can handle it. And I think that that's where prepping can kind of come into play for a lot of people. It's not weird to throw some water in your canner when you're running your canner 24/7 and you're doing all of this other stuff and really living off of your land. So I totally see how that's possible.
And it totally works that way too. For context, we have bees, we've got an orchard, we've got ducks and chickens and rabbits, and we don't eat the rabbits. And yeah, you dehydrate things and pick stuff, and then you make applesauce and then the sourdough, and then you're well, I can make bagels. And one thing leads to another, and then there's composting and
yes,
how can I grow? Yeah, all these things work together. So your daughter is almost 4. Do you plan on having your son involved in the same ways?
Yes, I'm very lucky that they both like to be outside. And I think that's honestly just because they've just been thrown into it. He was out in the garden with me last week when I was planting garlic and stuff. So he's not helping right now, and he's just around the space. But for sure, my daughter, she gets real stuff to do, and I don't force it either. It's just if she's around and she wants to help, then I give her something to do. If she loses interest and goes over to her mud kitchen, then for sure, like that's why that space is there, so that they have something fun and they can be around, and I'm not like forcing them to do anything in the garden.
I have one child who has, I think, learned a lot about where food comes from and, watching the process from buying seeds, sprouting the seeds, planting the seeds, harvesting, preserving, and then there's learning about animals. Where do you think for your kids, how do you think that's going to manifest later in life? Like what do you think they will take with them from growing up on a homestead?
I hope it's just respect for what they're consuming. So that's like a huge motivation for me and why I do so much with my hands. I hope that that's what my kids take out of it, is that they have respect for the things that they're consuming. If they're not doing it by hand and they're not growing their own food or taking care of their own animals or anything, I hope that they carry this ideal with them, that these things are worth just like holding on to a pedestal a little bit.
Yeah, it's not just garlic, like it's garlic that we grew. And when you see the whole process of what it takes, I always wonder if like our kids growing up on homesteads will take some pieces of it for granted. It'll be interesting to see. There's like probably another circle we could add to the Venn diagram, which is slow living. I think a lot of women and moms are like, I want my kids to grow up with space to run around. We want slow living. We want like connection to the land. And then there's kind of the reality of it. And I wish everyone could have the privilege of being able to grow food, but men turn to homesteading or like gardening for slow living and connection to the land. How do you think, if at all, the ability to do these things has impacted your health, your mental health? And do you think that it's realistic for everybody?
So I have definitely fallen prey to, it's almost like a billboard slogan, like the slow and simple life. It probably could be that. For me, I think I'm like way too curious and way too ambitious for it to really be a slow and curious life. We also, like, everything that we do is sweat equity. We do not have a very hefty bank account. So, I work part-time so that I can prioritize more time with my children. It's a privilege, but it's also like we feel the effects of that financially. And that just means it's more important to do a lot of what we're doing on the homestead and that we are actually the ones doing it. But it also means that like infrastructure stuff, if we want to expand the garden, if, a hose goes down or we have to repair the water at the goat barn, or replace siding, we become the carpenters, we become the builders, we become the architects, we become the plumbers, we become the electricians. We're, working on small engines. It's constantly shifting between all of these different roles and like learning those things, because I am not an electrician, plumber, builder. I think that in terms of the simple aspect of it, no, it's not really simple in that sense, just because there is always something to figure out. There is a lot that can go wrong on a homestead, especially when you have animals and like lives relying on you. I think the slow aspect carries more weight for me, not necessarily in that I'm like doing less, but the things that I am doing are taking more time. So yes, I will spend 36 hours making one loaf of bread. I could, take 15 minutes and go to the grocery store and buy one. In that sense, like, yeah, that's a much slower life, right? You're choosing that, but it's like we said before, like that's creating this like value and worth to those things and like connecting yourself to what you are consuming. When you're living this way, you realize you don't need that much, because if you develop this habit of making things yourself, buying things secondhand, even you're choosing to go without, and that does become ingrained in your mindset.
And I guess it depends on like what is our definition of like #slow living, because it's not just what it looks like on Instagram,
Right.
where I think of slow living as being something that's an antidote to like being on a screen or like, working on a computer or like feeling like we have to be hyper productive and plugged in.
The slow and simple tends to, and it's not always true, but I think my initial aversion to it is because it's very popularized on the tradwife side of this Venn diagram. It's like an ideal more than it is real. That's like my take on the tradwife thing. I think I prefer intentional living over slow living, because you do have to be really intentional with what, like when you are doing things a slow way, If it's going to take me 24 hours to make a loaf of bread, I need to be thinking about that 24 hours before I want to eat it. To me, that's intentional living.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not ever just making sourdough. It's like making sourdough. I'm hanging herbs to dry. I'm prepping my kids' lunch and trying to get them to eat lunch. And then I'm also making my lunch for my work week. So I'm doing like all of these things at once. And that's automatically just not slow.
Yeah. Part of like the criticism around the tradwife movement as it pertains to online culture is that it's often, like you said, stay-at-home moms who are saying we don't want to work. Our highest calling is taking care of our home and our family, which that could be perfectly fulfilling for a lot of people. But if you're going to make an income as somebody who puts content online, if you're going to make a lot of money from it, it's a full-time job. And can you really buy into slow living when you're generating income by being an influencer? What are your thoughts about that?
So my biggest concern with like the tradwife influencers is that it's misleading, that they're selling an ideal that isn't necessarily true. And it's also like, okay, they're selling you sourdough starter to parents, moms who are living paycheck to paycheck. And they're not telling those moms, hey, like you could just like put a jar of flour and water on your counter and keep adding to it for 5-7 days and you've got a sourdough starter, because like that yeast is free. It's just like the price point that they're selling them for, and it is more than, like, I think that it's more than a sourdough starter. Like, it's selling an ideal to women who have a completely different reality. What I've seen in that content sphere is just misleading, making it look like you're living in poverty or something. Because like traditional life, homesteading, you asked at the very beginning of this, does it run in my family? Do I have do I come from a long line of homesteaders? And the answer is yes, but I came from a long line of poor, very poor farmers who had no other choice in life but to work the land, tend the land, have it produce food for them, make sourdough because the yeast is free and they can fill bellies with it. And there's a disconnect between that reality and like the modern tradwife, I think. There's also the religious aspect of it. A lot of traditional homesteaders, tradwives, are very devout Catholics. I think that religion like silences a lot in women, in men as well. Like there's just topics that are completely taboo, but the negative effects for women are huge.
And you're looking at it as a mother of 2 kids and both of you and your husband work, and you come from a long line of people who authentically lived a homestead life. And so it's really interesting to hear your take on that. When people like Ballerina Farm, if you're not familiar with Ballerina Farm, her name is Hannah. Ballerina Farm is a farm, but also a brand run by a woman named Hannah. She's well known as a former Juilliard ballet dancer, courted by the son of the owner of the JetBlue Airlines, and he pursued her and they got married. She gave up dancing to have Ballerina Farm, and now she sells
sourdough starter. I don't know what else.
Yeah.
She sells I'm sure a whole bunch of other stuff.
I think people, whether it's true or not, they're very concerned for her for having given up ballet, which, who really knows what her intentions were. But anyway, Ballerina Farm has come under a lot of fire, her and her husband, the Nealmans.
My criticism of Ballerina Farm is on the lack of transparency. Like, they're working with an insane budget. Like, I mean, her husband's family are billionaires, and yet all of her content makes it look like she's living in poverty with these 8 children and making it look like it's a joy, which, I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible, but just the little things like hiding the dishwasher behind a cute little country hand-stitched curtain. You can do whatever you want in your kitchen that is a cute look to cover up an appliance, but it just feels a little dirty in this sense, because it's like, I'm selling you this ideal. I'm appealing to people who have a much different reality than me. Cause like in a way, it's like you're presenting yourself as living in this way. You're appealing to people who are working with fewer resources and selling them the things that you are doing and the products that you're using that you're getting for free. I mean, that's just like the influencer way in general. So yeah, I think that's my criticism with it.
Yeah. And I think any lifestyle brand is selling the lifestyle aspirationally, right? And so when we're selling sourdough starter or whatever product, it's like, so you can have a little piece of this lifestyle. But you're saying the women who are buying it, you know, they don't have $1 billion and resources and staff to lean on and to support them in their ventures.
And you don't, that's like, I think my big thing is like, there's no certification, there's no like checklist of things that you need to accomplish or that you need to have. You don't need a certain number of acres, a certain number of plants. Your garden doesn't need to be or look a certain way. You can live in an apartment and just strive to give your food scraps to a municipal composting company. You know, you go to farmers markets. Maybe you hang a few herbs in your kitchen, or you have like a balcony where you can put a couple of potted plants. Call yourself a homesteader. So that's where I think that some of these more extremes like just make a lot of people feel like the lifestyle is out of touch for them. And that's sad to me because I have found so much belonging and so much connection in living this type of lifestyle. And so, yeah, in a way I am like, okay, here, let me influence you to like,
Yeah.
do this too, but figure out your own path to it and do it your own way. Because where a lot of the tradwives are like, maybe subconsciously, maybe not subconsciously, but like there's this theory that like women are born into cages, and some of us live our whole lives and don't even notice the cage because it's been so many generations since we've been able to live outside of a cage of society, of religion, of the patriarchy and the Catholic Church, but was quickly, especially with patriarchy, like trying to break out of that cage real early. But, and I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of funny because like my attraction to homesteading is like, okay, this was like unlocking a door to who I truly am, like unlocking that cage and being able to like feel free. But I think for a lot of women, it's actually just another form of cage because it's about servitude. And that's the tradwife thing. It's like, it's about servitude. Like they are serving their husbands and their children, and they're serving Jesus, their God, whereas I'm serving nature. I'm only speaking about my experience in terms of what I think is best for me. It's really no judgment on anyone living that lifestyle who is completely happy and feels safe and comfortable in that lifestyle. Like, you do you.
Laura, that is such an interesting nuance. Like you, I felt like I found this huge piece of me when I started working on the farm. Yeah, it is self-actualization and healing. Or we could be doing that same exact activity, composting or whatever, and be thinking, oh, I'm serving. This is a way for me to serve someone else.
You're like, oh, I have to empty that compost pile before my husband gets home. And
those are I think those have very different implications. And depending on which circle you're in this Venn diagram, the language changes so much. And especially like as moms, we're teaching what are the core values you have as a homesteader. And you know, is it about serving other people? And have shared about like when you are a homesteader, your hobbies sometimes can still be things that we're doing to serve other people and how we can enjoy them. And sometimes it's like, wait, who am I doing this for? I really like to hear you say that you felt like it was opening a door for you as well to find this is who I am. I'm not doing this for anyone but me because it returns me to myself.
Ever since that first day that neighbor's goat, his name was Crybaby, when I walked him over to our house, I was like, I am in the right place. I'm doing the right thing. Like, this is what I was put here for.
Is Crybaby still with us?
No, unfortunately not. No, that's what the neighbors named him. But yeah.
We have talked also about the journey to motherhood being rough. I know I actually just wrote about this when I was working on my book about how like moving to the farm specifically, I didn't realize how healing it was going to be for me to do things like work in an orchard and plant things. And I needed that so badly, mentally, and physically. I think, we don't talk a lot about the chapters of motherhood, or some of us take paths to motherhood that require us to heal from them. For people who have faced challenges in early motherhood or birth trauma, do you think that homesteading plays a role in healing?
I had preeclampsia with both of my children, so the births were pretty tricky and required like a little bit of a different recovery. Less severe with my son, but more traumatic because his whole birth story and ended up in an ER visit. And I think that's also fresher. He's a year old, so I'm like still postpartum, right? Had to think about it a little bit differently. I don't think that traditional medicine is very equipped to care for the postpartum mother. And I think I found a lot of support in the friendships that I've made in the farming and homesteading community, because motherhood is a very common thing with homesteaders, and whether you're progressive or conservative. Part of my healing journey through my homestead was starting these classes for children. It's really been for myself. So it's been amazing to have families come to this space and be able to like interact with your garden and see food, and like hear parents just in the background and be like, I can never get my kid to eat peas, and they're just like plucking them off of my plants and eating them raw. And just seeing the children interact, and like a lot of the same kids came month after month to all of these classes, and it's been really, really empowering, and it's felt like super aligned. This act of like pouring a ton of energy into like teaching these like 3-year-olds how to plant seeds and plant garlic, and we made like worm compost bins and play in dirt, and just like seeing them pick up worms and hold them, and watching them from like day 1 be scared of the worms to like month 7 just like, oh my God, I found a worm, and just like carry it across the garden to you and stuff. It's just like the transformation's real, and all of the energy that you pour into it, I'm like receiving back tenfold. And so I think that whether you're doing something like that or just planting one seed and receiving 47 grape tomatoes, that is an example of like receiving your energy back tenfold. And I think that is how we care for like postpartum mothers, is either like literally that, or finding ways to like give each other energy and vitality. It's not just, oh, go take a nap. It's like feeling alive again.
Gosh, Laura, absolutely. Allowing postpartum moms to return to their purpose, whatever that may be. That's definitely not something that you hear as like, can I come see the baby? Or like bring a casserole, and those things are fine. And we talk about like, oh man, I really need a shower, or like really good friends. Usually people who've had kids before will be like, okay, I kind of know how to show up for a new mom. But like, what was it that you found in the homesteading community from other experienced moms that you weren't getting from the traditional postpartum experience?
So I think more just like a sounding board, and that how I was feeling was real, because I was going through like postpartum anxiety, depression, and I was like assigned a counselor, and the bill for it was like outrageous. And it was just like, so it was like just talking with people and just being like feeling validated and saying that, because I think a lot of times like women, like we're just like, okay, like this is what the authorities told me, and I've been, told to just like say yes and be a people pleaser all my life. And no matter how much I grow out of that, I like sometimes I do revert back to that, and I do need that like community to just be like, no, that like that's not okay. And just in general, a community. I don't have much of a physical community where I am. I don't have any family, and all of the friends that I do have are friends that I've made through Instagram that are like local in homesteading and farming communities. And so one of the things that I did was I like invited them all over to my house for my birthday and threw myself a birthday party, which I've never done. It was like very uncomfortable. I had not met a lot of those women before, and like it like brings me to tears a little to think about like how many people like showed up in person. And it was just like, we just had some tea and snacks, and I had like a bunch of little clay pots, and we painted them, and it was just like, it was a really beautiful thing. And just like, oh yeah, like you aren't alone in this. And that, it was huge. So
yeah. Oh, that's getting me choked up. because like that's the thing that we may need the most in the postpartum year, fourth trimester, like whatever we want to call it. And at least for me, it was 13 months of postpartum, like definitely. Even like having people in your space to support you so you can return to the things that make you feel like you. Yeah. When we have parasocial relationships through social media, they do develop into real ones if we give them the chance, and we need community so badly.
That's something that's been tricky for me in like the influencer world, which I don't really consider myself an influencer anymore. I stumbled upon it because I grew a following, and then I tried it out. I didn't love it. I'm just sharing what feels right for me to share.
Maybe that's another like circle that we add to the Venn diagram of like influencers, because there's a big overlap for the tradwives. So can people in the Columbus, Ohio area take classes from you?
We'll have monthly classes, like probably starting in January, like a magic potion mud kitchen, just free play, not really a class.
Okay, that sounds so fun.
Yeah, the mud kitchen is incredible. So yes, I will have those classes, and I think I am going to do donation based so that like it's just more accessible to everyone. Because one thing that I am working on for local Columbus people is like a free garden meetup group. So monthly themes meet at public places, like January meet at a brewery, and just everyone bring paper and pen and doodle your garden plan, and we can just like bounce ideas off of each other. And I think it's a really beautiful idea, and it's like low pressure on everyone, even the organizer, to just be like, yeah, we're just meeting up at this place at this time. So I'm really hoping to curate like a pretty good group of just local plant people doing stuff like that. So
it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And I've seen a picture of this mud kitchen. Can you tell us a little bit about what is the premise of Mud Kitchen? Why do we love it?
So I was the child who would like go outside and run into the woods and create my own mud kitchen out of just like a fallen tree and straight up mud and leaves and whatever. We have like one of those sample tables, like it has a drain because they fill it with ice and then they put samples in it. So we had that for many, many years, and we just never knew what to do with it. But I'm like, it has a drain, so it's like the perfect sink. So I cut it down to be perfect height for like 3-4-year-olds, and just scrounged together some pallets and other pieces of lumber. So it's maybe like 6 feet wide. And then I painted like a few burners on one of them, so it looks like a stove. And it does have a compartment underneath where they can put stuff, and just hung up some whisks. And I recently got some like mini cupcake tins from the thrift store.
So cute.
It's just, I usually fill it with water before they come. And then I've been doing themes. So we did our garlic class in November. And so I just got a couple of pumpkins, and all I did was cut the top of them off. And the kids like scooped them out and filled the pumpkins with water and mud and sticks, and, just like seriously occupies them for hours. And it's right in our garden. So for me, when I'm spending a lot of time out there, whether or not I have, a million 3-year-olds over for fun or not, my own children can like play in it, and it keeps them occupied. So
Great. That's
worthy
brilliant
endeavor.
And
it's a mud kitchen. Like I think maybe the simpler the better.
it's amazing how much we can get done during nap, especially when we don't know how long it will last. It's like how productive can we be? I love the idea of a mud kitchen.
Yeah, my husband has recently retrained my brain for thinking about this. And I mean, it depends on like where I'm at with my cycle and stuff too, but he has just been like, do what you cannot do when they're awake. And like, you cannot rest when they're awake. So like, it's okay for you to like sit on the couch and read a book while they're napping, because you can't do that while they're awake. But like, I can do a lot of things while they are awake. So I'm really grateful for him for just being like, no, it's okay. Loaf on the couch.
Yeah.
Read that book.
And we all need rest, more rest than we're getting. Your husband's such a wise man. And sometimes we just need that permission, or like someone to pointedly say, no, that's okay for you to do that, because you need it. And you're probably not going to do it unless prompted.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing with homesteading is like, you're never going to be bored. There's always things to do. Like I can get in bed at 11 o'clock and be like, damn it, I need to feed my sourdough starter. It's really easy to fall into the trap of like, there's always something that I need to do.
Okay, Laura, we have a recurring segment called What's in Your Bag. And I'm wondering if you have a purse or like your everyday carry with you. And if you could tell us what's inside of it.
It has like my moleskin like planner
Yes,
book in
important.
It has another notebook. Right now it has 2 seed catalogs. It has Ravenwall Kimmerer's new book, The Service Berry, which I haven't cracked open yet, but I'm excited to. It has my Kindle. It has diaper wipes and diapers, snacks, so like fruit pouches, and Costco has these like granola bites that are actually like crazy good for, like there's so many different nutrients in them. So it has those, and then it has a tincture called Lion's Heart, which is good for anxiety that I get from my friend at Conscious Seed. And it has calendula lip balm that I make, and my wallet.
Okay, that sounds lovely.
It has a lot of things in it, mostly books.
And yes, so Laura messaged me to make sure I knew about Ravenwall Kimmerer's new book, Service Berry. It just came out this week, right? Okay, got to get a copy of that. Laura, is there anything else you want to tell the audience besides we should all be following the Hippie Billy Homestead Substack and Instagram? Where else can we learn from you?
Substack is like sort of a lot more from the heart and sort of my esoteric space where I get a little frou-frou, and Instagram is just like everyday life. You want to plant a seed, just plant a seed. Like don't overthink it. It's just that spiral. Like you just start in the center and like it's going to all grow from there, and that it's going to take time and not everything happens overnight, and just give yourself space to experiment and grow.
Yeah, like you said, we don't need credentials in order to start growing something. So you could start with one pot. I love your accessible approach to like get in on the ground floor with homesteading.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a master gardener. I don't have a degree in botany, but I can't grow a shit ton of food. So,
and I think that's part of the beauty of it too, is like your first year of growing food is, at least mine was pretty rocky.
Yeah.
And seeing every
but still,
year
like
how
at the
it
time, it
improves.
felt so amazing.
Yes, it did. It's so rewarding. Same with sourdough. Like it took me a year to actually get like a good bread, right? And it's really rewarding. And I love your accessible approach to it. So anything else you want to share, Laura, before we sign off?
No, just thank you very much for giving me this space.
Thank you for sharing about all these different aspects of your life and your work. And we'll be sure to follow Hippie Billy Homestead.
That's it for this episode of the Modern Hysteria podcast, where we shine a light on the taboos of women's health and womanhood. Join me next time for a second helping of Tiffany Torres Williams as we talk about purity culture, celebrity encounters, and consent, and how purity culture proliferates in our marriages, whether you are religious or not. Subscribe to this podcast on Spotify and consider leaving a 5-star review if you like the show. And I'll see you next time.